Hi there, thanks for joining us. My name is Duncan Robinson. I'm the political editor and Badger columnist at The Economist magazine, and I'm very lucky to be joined by David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, and someone who will likely play an extremely key role if there is a future Labour government, which, if you believe the polls, looks relatively likely at the moment, but we can get onto that later. So David, let's just start by imagining that we are next year, that Labour have won the general election and you are now Foreign Secretary. From a European perspective, who's your first call going to be? Who are you going to get in touch with first?
Well, look, I probably should begin by saying that I'm already in touch with Europe. One of the important things, I think, since taking up the role almost 2 years ago, coming out of the pandemic, was to make sure that people understood that there was a prospect of Labour coming back, and we took a different view to the current government, particularly in relation to relations with our colleagues across Europe. So I've been to Berlin many times, and of course, in the current government in Berlin, we have a sister party. I was in Portugal just a few weeks ago, again, with a sister party to the Labour Party in office. But of course, to Ukraine, to the Balkans, Kosovo, to Sweden, to Finland, facing with their desire to come into NATO, particularly, and to Brussels, of course, and I'll be going back to Brussels. It's been very, very important to make it clear that we have a different vision of our relationship with the European family. We want a special relationship with the European family, notwithstanding the challenges that were posed by Brexit, of course, and the division and the divisiveness, but also coming out effectively of the single market. So I would expect that my first call would be on Germany and France, our very close friendship with the Irish, which has been under strain, of course, during the Northern Ireland Protocol and the issues, and then, of course, to Brussels.
Very, very comprehensive answer. So in terms of improving the relationship, let's sort of diagnose why it's gone a bit wrong. How much of it is sort of personal? How much of it is structural? So there's a lot of dislike for Boris Johnson in Brussels, but he's now gone. And Britain is outside the single market, outside the customs union. We are just fundamentally foreign when it comes to the EU now. And so there is always going to just be some friction. So how do you fix that?
Well, I think the starting point is to say that Brexit was a very messy, intractable, and long-running divorce process, let's face it. And in fact, we only really concluded the arrangements, if you like, how we're going to organise the children with the Windsor Protocol, Windsor Framework, a few weeks ago. I think that I was very sad to see Boris Johnson particularly continue to prosecute the arguments around leave long after we had left. And if you like, decide to politicise enmity with friends and colleagues in Europe. I thought that a very big low point was Liz Truss describing Emmanuel Macron as an enemy, effectively. It didn't make any sense whatsoever. And I don't think you can sign up to an agreement with allies, friends and partners, only to tear up the agreement 2 years later, at least to threaten to tear it up 2 years later, which is what the Northern Ireland Bill proposed. So I think that for all those reasons, things got very low. So what I would say is that trust has been low. It's obviously coming back a little under the leadership of Rishi Sunak, and the Windsor Framework has been important, but there's a long way to go. And it begins with structured dialogue. we have to be meeting on a regular basis. And this is obviously at official level, but also at foreign sec level, ministerial level, and leadership level, to discuss the issues that are central and important across Europe. We should be talking regularly about climate. We should be talking regularly about the debates around supply chains that have come out of the pandemic, and indeed come out of some of the issues in relation to China over this next period, and the Inflation Reduction Act. In America, we should be talking about AI. In terms of security in Europe, the Balkans is a huge concern, and we should be having dialogue about that. And when I speak to the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, they raise with me the issue of the Sahel. There's more that we can do as a European family in that region. Understanding, just last week we saw awful extremism on the streets of Paris. Whilst yes, we're fighting war in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are valiant, and we're all stand behind Ukraine's fight for their sovereignty. Terrorism and extremism also remains a concern, and human trafficking. All of these issues require regular structured dialogue. I think the first thing we would want to do with our European family is get back to structured dialogue with the European Union.
Okay. No, thank you. I should have said at the start, please feel free to whack questions into the chat, and then I can fire them at David. So please feel free to pop over any relevant questions at all. So you mentioned a few times in other interviews about the review of the trade relationship that's going to be coming in 2025. How much is on the table there? Should we expect sort of tweaking to just make it work better, or can there be something more fundamental?
Well, look, I think that there is an opportunity, I think, because I think in terms of a world view, clearly with Keir Starmer in number 10, Emmanuel Macron still in office in France, Schulz in Germany, there is an opportunity for a shared vision and view. And what we want with that TCA, notwithstanding the elections that will take place, of course, in the Parliament and the Commission next year, is a sector by sector approach to really look at some of the issues that have arisen, the friction that is there. Now, look, I don't want to be naive. Outside of the single market and a customs union, there will be friction, and that was a decision that was made when we Brexited and effectively left the single market. But I do think on a veterinary deal, we would see a reduction on friction on goods, which I think could make a big difference. I think that our Europeans are raising with me the concerns around mobility, mutual recognition of qualifications. There obviously Horizon, whether we will get breakthrough there, we wait to see, but we think in the Labour Party that it's very important to get back into that framework. Data adequacy is another area, and we may be able also to look again at the issues around financial equivalency. But sector by sector, reducing friction, I hope beneficial for the EU, and certainly beneficial for the UK, given that exports are down significantly by a third.
So Labour wants a more institutional, normal relationship with the EU, where you're meeting regularly, everything's very structured. There's presumably there's sort of extra treaties and things like this. This sounds rather sort of Swiss. Is that the right way of thinking about it?
I don't think so, because I think that clearly the UK represents the sixth biggest economy in the global community. We are an important member of the UN Security Council. We are a G7 nation, and in dialogue, once we have built that trust, and we can build then on our relationship with the European Union, clearly what we are putting in place is unique here to the UK. The other thing, by the way, that we're very clear on is that we think that Boris Johnson was wrong to reject the Europeans' offer of a EU-UK security pact. We do think that war in Ukraine has demonstrated the need for us to work as closely as possible with the European Union on issues of security. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that France and the United Kingdom represent 50% of the European family's military spend. We wait to see what will happen in North America with clearly the election that they will have at the end of next year. But I think all of us recognise, particularly with the vastly changing geopolitical map and problems also in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits, that a lot will fall to Europe. Against this backdrop, it's been very interesting to see the PESCO arrangements emerging, where a partner in a small part of that is there more that the UK can do. On sanctions, the European Union has played a major role. Is there more we can do? And of course, whether it's terrorism, stepping back from some of the arrangements, clearly our intelligence capability in the UK, along with our Five Eyes partners, is amongst the very best in the world, and indeed was very important in the run-up to actually calling out what we knew that Vladimir Putin was doing around Ukraine. I think that there's a lot we can do. I've already mentioned our concerns about the Balkans, where that is, some of that is NATO-led, but quite a lot of it is beyond NATO. There's much more that we can do with the EU-UK security pact, and we in the Labour Party would want to revisit that.
So just going back to what can happen in 2025 when the agreement is under review. So there's a question from Rosalind Stevens in the audience there, and she makes the point that Stefan Föhring, a senior official at one of the institutions, says that any changes to the CTA can only be around implementation. So nothing too substantial. So are you in danger of raising expectations a little too high?
Well, I don't think we in the Labour Party have raised expectations too high, because we've been very clear that we're not going to be re-entering discussions around the single market and the customs union, and understand that there are many, many people in the United Kingdom that are very sad about that fact. But we know that there is not the political consensus here in the UK to move in that direction. I think we would particularly need to see a change in the Conservative Party, and that can only come, I suspect, after losing the next general election and maybe another one after that. So notwithstanding that, I think we can work together, and let us see where we get to in the middle of 2025. It's some way off, and we will be attempting to do as much as we can. It's one of the reasons why I'm in lots of European capitals and also in Brussels, having those conversations to see exactly where we land.
So just on that phrase you used, political consensus. So even if it got to the point where 75-80% of people in polls were supporting rejoin, Labour wouldn't shift their policy unless the Conservative Party had also sort of agreed to it.
Well, there's two sides to this. I think it's to recognise that obviously there's tremendous concern in the UK about productivity, about rising inflation and a cost of living crisis. But it's also the case here that there are other reasons in the underlying economy that have nothing to do with the European Union that create significant weakness here. We have some serious problems in skills here in the UK. We have some of the best universities in the world. But beyond universities, in further education, in terms of skilling up our workforce, some of the problems that we had with free movement, there are significant issues that Labour government has to attend to. Childcare, we've said, is very important. If you want women in the workplace, you have to deal with some of the childcare problems that we've got here in the UK. These are not problems that are as present in other parts of the European Union. And indeed, we are lagging behind desperately in terms of the race for clean energy and green jobs and a renewable plan, and that's why we've got the green prosperity plan. Germany are investing 19 billion in relation to this. France are investing 16 billion in relation to this. We're seeing a paltry sum coming from the Sunak government. You might remember that Rishi Sunak wasn't even going to go to COP27. We have a plan, it's 28 billion, and we want to work with the European family on that, particularly in light of the Inflation Reduction Act. All of these issues are not about the European Union, and it is important for us to deal with those productivity issues in situ when we come into, domestically, when we come into government. And those are flexibilities that we have as a consequence of leaving the European Union. So, of course, we want to build on the TCA. There will be constraints. I don't want to deny that there will be constraints on that, because we've said that we're outside the single market. Nevertheless, when European colleagues say to me, we're very, very sad to see the drop in European students at UK universities, is there more that we might be able to do on that? I suspect there will be.
Where do interests differ when it comes to the EU and the UK? So you've talked about lots of things where you agree, whether it's Ukraine or things like that, but where is the actual fundamental differences between the UK and the EU?
I don't think there's a fundamental difference in the way that we look at the world, and indeed war in Europe reminds us of that. We are all liberal democracies. Liberal democracies are on the wane in these challenging geopolitical times. Many of our democracies have experienced a new populism on the right and on the left, which we have to guard against. And we're all challenged by the climate emergency. So there is a lot of commonality across the European family. I would not want to emphasize difference. But clearly outside of the European Union, there are areas in which we would want to, for example, on food standards. I can't see us racing to the bottom on food standards here in the UK. That's not our view. We would want to be aligned with what's happening in the European Union. But, for example, we have here in the UK a very strong, one of the strongest insurance markets in the world. We have freedoms there to do things slightly differently. But I would want to emphasise our common approach and the common way in which we look at the world.
Okay. There's a criticism that Labour's being slightly naive, that you're sort of being love-bombed by your colleagues in European capitals at the moment, because you're not the government at the moment. You're not having to ask for awkward things. And basically, the EU has a nice side, but it also has a nasty side. And it's a regional hegemon and can usually get what it's want. Are you sort of ready for things to get quite nasty during negotiations, or do you think you can actually avoid that?
I don't think that things need to get nasty. I don't recognise that caricature, and I don't see that is likely to happen. Our tone in the Labour Party has never been hostile to Europe. It really isn't hostile to Europe. And indeed, some of the hostility that's grown up in the Conservative Party, in a way, has brought us closer with many of our European partners. We're realistic about the horizon over the next 5 years. I think that we have to renew the trust that broke down, I think, between the European Union and the UK. And I think that we can get on and do that. We're not naive. We really aren't naive. But neither are we negotiating at this point in time. So I think, having not begun negotiations and not won a general election such that we can begin those negotiations, let us not be too pessimistic about the outcome of those negotiations. But we do recognise that the European Union and the family of 27 countries have shared rules that they treasure. We were part of that family. We understand that story, and we respect it.
Excellent. Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us all. I found that absolutely fascinating. And so thank you for taking us moments, and thank you for everyone for joining us. Cheers.
Thank you.